people would ask, who is Chief Seattle? Well, he was a kind and wise chief of Native American tribes in the Puget Sound area, namely the Duwamish and the Suquamish. He befriended the whites who arrived in the area and took steps to build strong ties between his people and the settlers. He was converted to Catholicism by Jesuit missionaries at the age of 70, when he took the baptismal name of Noah, the ultimate survivor, and a man who preserved his people through the Great Flood. Elliott was a slave of Duwamish origins. Despite becoming a man out for peace in his latter years, Seattle's youth was that of a warrior, a Native American Odysseus, crafting careful, well-executed surprise attack plans. Seattle actively encouraged interracial unions and gladly attended weddings despite United States law forbidding such unions until 1868. Seattle fathered 6 children in his lifetime. His youngest daughter, Susan Jacobs, married a white man named Asa Fettler. The key turning point in the settlement of the area by whites and their relationship with the natives already living there was the Treaty of Point Elliott. Seattle's name appears first of the Native American signatories, just after that of Governor Isaac Stevens. But next to the name there is no signature, just a simple X. Seattle and his fellow Native signatories were illiterate, and so all marked with an X. After signing the Treaty of Point Elliott, Seattle gifted a white flag to Governor Stevens and gave an impassioned plea. Now by this we make friends, and put away all bad feelings if we ever had any. We are the friends of the Americans. All the Indians are of the same mind. We look upon you as our father. We will never change our minds. But since you have been to see us, we will always be the same. Now do you send this paper of our hearts to the great chief. That is all I have to say. On the 22nd of January in the year 1855, at Point Elliott, in what is now the city of Mukilteo, about 25 miles north of Seattle, Native Americans met to agree to and signed a treaty relinquishing 54,000 acres of their land to the government of the United States of America for the sum of $150,000, equivalent to over $5 million today, paid out over the next 20 years. The land would come to be occupied by the cities of Seattle, Brenton, Tukwila, Bellevue, Mercer Island, and most of what is today King County. At the signing of the treaty, 4 chiefs considered most important by the whites were seated at the front. The sub-chiefs were seated next, and then the others in attendance were seated in no particular order. Stevens saw the natives as not being adults in rights and responsibilities, and that they needed guidance until they had matured. And for him, part of that maturity was assimilation with the white American culture. By 1855, the Puget Sound natives had been weakened by disease and had heard of the Indian Wars to the east, as other tribes had tried to fight off white invasions. They knew it was useless to refuse to deal with the United States government. White settlers were already moving onto their lands, and the most they could hope for was payment for the land taken and the opportunity to be left alone on the land that was left. "You understand well my purpose," said Governor Stevens, "and you want now to know the special things we propose to do for you. We want to place you in homes where you can cultivate the soil, raising potatoes and other articles of food, and where you may be able to pass in canoes over the waters of the Sound and catch fish and back to the mountains to get roots and berries. The lands are yours, and we swear to pay you for them. We thank you that you have been so kind to all the white children of the Great Father, the President, who have come here from the East. Those white children have always told you that you would be paid for your lands, and we are now here to buy them. My children, I believe that I've got your hearts. You will have my heart. We will put our hearts down on paper, and then we will sign our names. I will send that paper to the Great Father, and if he says it is good, it will stand forever." The negotiations had to be translated from English to Chinook jargon to the various tribal languages. Chinook jargon, a trade language with limited vocabulary, required the need of a second interpreter. Stevens saw the natives as in the way of America's progress and in need of being removed. First, he let the native representatives speak, and then he did as he always intended with the treaty. Stevens had hopes that the Indians would become farmers and the tribes would be concentrated on a few reservations, freeing up the land for American settlement, which would prevent British and Russian settlements from being founded in a time when the American government did not think its hold on the territory was secure. This had been the reason for the treaties and homesteading acts. Governor Stevens consistently made verbal promises to native tribes, but failed to uphold them in written treaties, deemed by Judge James Wickerson unfair, unjust, ungenerous, and illegal 40 years later. Local tribes accustomed to honest but hard bargaining with the Hudson's Bay Company were unprepared for Stevens' less transparent approach. Governor Stevens deviated from instruction by the federal government, emphasizing addressing issues where settlers encroached on native lands or where the two groups were immediately adjacent. Instead, he attempted to resolve native matters for the entire territory, provoking resentment among the indigenous population. The Treaty of Point Elliott allowed the Puget Sound Coast Salish people to retain their ancestral fishing grounds, granted them 2 reservations, 1,280 acres apiece, and reserved 36 sections of land equating to a single township. The American government would also provide teaching and aids in trades such as carpentry, blacksmithing, agriculture, and medicine free of charge to the natives. However, for all they were given, the natives were not allowed to trade out of the dominions of the United States. They were also only to fight defense wars against other native tribes. Stipulation within the treaty, however, also said that the natives had the following year to move away from growing population centers to establish isolated reservations. The treaty itself would not be ratified by the United States Congress for 4 years after it was signed. In the meantime, there would be fighting. The Battle of Seattle happened 1 year to the day after the Treaty of Point Elliott was signed. It lasted 1 day, resulting in the natives being turned back. On June 7, 1866, on Bainbridge Island, the man whose name had been given to the city of Seattle died with little to no note in the newspapers. The city named for him passed a tax on saying Seattle's name to accommodate the native belief that saying the name of the deceased disturbed their rest. His gravesite today is across the sound from the city which bears his name, and every year during Chief Seattle Days in August, Suquamish arrive in their finest regalia to honor the man who took efforts to prevent a Washingtonian Wounded Knee. After his death, the United States government burned down Old Man House in an effort to encourage the Suquamish to spread over the reservation and become farmers. The Old Man House was the longhouse where Chief Seattle was living when he died. The treaty Seattle signed on that January day has continued to influence the lives of his people. Citing the treaty and the restriction to reservations of the Indians, state and federal government began to restrict the fishing rights in favor of white competitors after 1890. This treatment and violation of the treaty, which as a treaty ratified by the Congress of the United States is the supreme law of the land, only increased through the 1950s. In 1974, 119 years after Seattle had put his X on the spot next to his name, Judge George Bolt made a crucial decision to uphold the promise made in Article 5 of the treaty, promising the preservation of fishing rights. The Bolt decision, another turning point, was resisted by non-Indians and was upheld at appeal in 1979. The Snohomish, Steilacoom, and Duwamish have not received federal recognition from the courts, as they were not acknowledged as organized civil governments. The struggle to achieve recognition for the tribes is ongoing. The city that today bears his name does so in acknowledgement of all the things Chief Seattle did to bring the two populations together. The turning point of this presentation and the Indians' lives is the Treaty of Point Elliott.